What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Stamina Dragonknight. So the Stamina Dragonknight has definitely seen a resurgence in Elsweyr. So it enjoyed one sort of patch where it was one of the top Stamina DPS classes in the game, and then it quickly fell from its perch as the top Stamina DPS, supplanted by the Stamina Nightblade. Now with Stamina Nightblade having seen a few nerfs here and Stamina DK seeing a few buffs, they've come resurged again and are now fairly competitive. They're no longer a joke when it comes to Stamina DPS, although they are still not the best Stamina DPS. They're probably third or fourth in line now. So a little bit of an improvement from previous patches, although they still don't compete with the current top classes. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. Now, for those of you guys who are new to the channel, I do also go over several different gear sets that you might want to consider running, just to have on hand. This particular gear set is really focused in on maximizing your single target DPS, so other sets might be more useful in different scenarios. So we'll be going over all the different sets that you're going to want to have on hand for those different scenarios. Then we will go over our rotation on a 6 million dummy parse, I should say 6 million dummy, not a parse. It's a fairly simple rotation, very static, so not that much to kind of worry about. And then we'll close things off for the 21 million dummy raid parse, so you guys can get a comparison parse to the other stamina classes in the game. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. First, as always, with our gear. So again, this particular gear set is focused in on maximizing single target DPS. For our must helm sets, we have Velidreth. This is the strongest stamina helm in the game right now, mainly because the 3 disease spores that spawn can hit the same boss more than once if the hitbox is large enough. This comes from Cradle of Shadows, so you do need to have access to the Shadows of the Hiss DLC if you want to grab this set. You'll notice that I have a max health enchant here, and that's because we are using RTM Decoy Broth or Dubious Command Throne for additional regen, so we do need additional max health enchant here in order to get our health up to a acceptable raid level. And then for our body set, we have Perfected Relequen, still the strongest set in the game right now for stamina DPS. This comes from Vet Cloudrest, armor from +1, +2, +3, jewelry from +2 and +3, weapons from any of them. Now, Relequen's is definitely more of a single target set. If you need to switch targets very often, then Relequen is not really going to have the opportunity to really build up to its max stacks. So in those instances, you might want to run a different set here instead of Relequen's. Because it also comes from Cloudrest, you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to get this set. You can't buy it, you can't necessarily get it from somebody else unless they trade it to you in the trial. So also keep that in mind. Now, the imperfect version of Arms of Relequen is still a pretty decent set as well, and is actually a fairly good replacement until you're able to get the perfected version. The main difference there is that 1096 max stamina, which isn't that big of a deal on stamina DPS because you don't really have as many max stamina modifiers as magic DPS do with max magic modifiers. Then for our front bar set, we have Perfected Lokkestiiz. This comes from the new trial, Sunspire. The perfected version comes from clearing any of the bosses on vet. Doesn't have to be hard mode, just normal vet is fine. So you can just farm this on normal vet and it's perfectly okay to do so. Now you will need to have access to Elsweyr in order to farm this set yourself. To the Lokkestiiz is definitely a very, very powerful set. Perfect version here adds the 833 weapon crit. The imperfect version does not have that weapon crit. So again, very similar to Relequen, a little bit weaker. The imperfect version compared to the perfect version, but still acceptable to use while you're farming up for the perfected version of this set here. Now, Lokkestiiz can be either on the front bar set like I have it here, or it can be on the body set because it is a medium armor set, so it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. But if you're pairing this with Relequen, make sure Relequen is on the body because you don't want to accidentally lose all those stacks while you're on your back bar. And for weapons, we have 2 daggers, and then for our back bar, we have a Maelstrom Bow. The bow is infused weapon damage enchant. The daggers here are going to be 2 sharpened, and I have poisons here, but you will be running double ravage health poisons, which I will make really quickly right here. So double ravage health poisons, the bug has been fixed, so now it will actually work as intended. It will not decrease the enchant on your back bar anymore, so double ravage health poisons is still really now going to be really, really strong. So go ahead and put that there. And because we are running poison, it doesn't really matter what enchants we have on hand. The important thing is to just go with 2 sharpened. You can also go with nirn main hand instead of the sharpened main hand. If you do that, you will need to shift your CP points around a little bit in order to make up for that loss in penetration. For jewelry traits and enchants, we have Bloodthirsty, all weapon damage enchants. You can also go with Infused as your jewelry traits. If you don't have access to Somerset and you can't transmute into Bloodthirsty or Infused because you don't have access to the jewelry crafting line, then you're going to be stuck with Robust. Then for our armor traits, I already talked about having that 1 health enchant, but everything else is all divines, all max stamina enchants, all medium, because we do want to maximize our overall crit chance through the medium armor passive there. Moving on to other potential sets you're going to want to have on hand. So again, this is really maximizing our overall single target DPS, but Relequen is not very good for fights where you need to switch targets very often. So in terms of other sets that you're going to want to have on hand, either to use while you are farming for these other sets, Relequen and Lokkestiiz, or to use in place of one or both of these sets. Starting off with Dungeon, we have Leviathan. This comes from Crypt of Hearts, so a base game set here. It adds a lot of weapon crit. So you ideally want to have this on the body set so that way you don't lose that crit when you swap to your back bar at all. So you can also run this as a front bar set, but it's not going to be nearly as effective as if you had it on your body instead. Definitely want to try to keep that as a body set there. And that's really the, then you have Sogman's Warband here. This comes from Frostbolt, so you need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to get this set here. This is basically more or less a weaker version, I should say a different version of Advanced Yokeda. So it adds 2 weapon crit and physical penetration, so you're able to invest a little bit less into piercing with Sogman's Warband. And then it also gives you a lot of weapon crit, up to 1,290 additional weapon crit, which is less than Advanced Yokeda's 2,000, but still really nice. The bonus here is that it also gives you minor force when you have all 10 stacks active. So you're able to drop Rearming Trap and put on another skill in its place, basically allowing you to gain an additional global cooldown, so you can use 1 more spammable instead. The downside is, of course, you don't get as much weapon crit compared to Advanced Yokeda, but the buff also lasts for a longer period of time, 10 seconds, compared to Advanced Yokeda's 6 seconds. So a really nice set to hold onto here in those instances where you might not be able to use Advanced Yokeda to its fullest effect, and you don't have Lokkestiiz yet. In terms of overland sets, not too many overland sets are particularly good to use in endgame PvE. You have Spriggan's Thorns, which just adds physical penetration. This is going to be more useful for trash pulls. You can wear this on the body, and you don't necessarily need to worry about having your tank apply major fraction to everything. You have additional penetration, so really nice for ad pulls, trash pulls, but not really great for bosses. The only other set that's really useful as an overland set is going to be Briarheart. This comes from Hrothgar, so you do need to have access to the Hrothgar DLC if you want to farm this, or you can just buy it off of guild traders. So Briarheart is a proc set, so you can wear this on the front bar, so whenever you do critical damage, you basically have a chance to increase your weapon damage, and while you have that weapon damage increase, you also get an additional heal for every critical hit you get. A nice heal as well as some nice weapon damage, and it is a proc set, so you can wear this on the front bar as well as the body if you so desire, because it is a medium armor set here. And then finally, in terms of trial sets, the only trial set, 2 trial sets you're going to want to hold on to. Two-Fanged Snake, which comes from Sanctum Ophidia, so this is a base game set. Very similar to Spriggan's Thorns, very, very nice in trash pulls, not so nice in boss fights. Other sets are going to be stronger in boss fights. Then you have Vicious Serpent, also known as Vicious Ophidian, which comes from all 3 Kraglin trials, so another base game set here. And it reduces the cost of all your stamina abilities by 8%, so it just gives you a little bit of additional sustain that way. Not quite as strong as the other minor Slayer sets in the game, but still nice to hold on to. It's really nice for things like trash pulls in order to maintain your max stamina while you're blowing through trash in trials, for example. Now for any sort of monster helm replacements, there is one monster helm replacement that you might want to consider running as a stam decay, and that's going to be Stormfist. So Stormfist adds additional stamina regen on the one piece, so really nice for sustain. So you want to run Stormfist if you're having trouble sustaining your rotation. It's a little bit better than Velidreth in that regard. That being said, Velidreth is still going to provide better DPS. In addition, the Stormfist proc is not very consistent because it procs on a specific target, and if the target moves out of the proc, then you basically wasted that proc damage. So Stormfist, not quite as strong as Velidreth in terms of pure DPS, but it is nice to have on hand if you need a little bit of additional sustain. Alright, that's pretty much it for all the gear stuff. Oh, there's one more gear set that I want to talk about. I can find it though. A heavy armor set, so it is here. It is Berserking Warrior, also known as Advancing Yokeda. So this comes from the Hellrot Citadel trial, so base game set here. It is a heavy armor set, so you will need to get this in jewelry and weapons in order to make the most use out of it. So when you deal melee damage, your critical strike chance increases by 400 for 6 seconds, up to 5 times, so a maximum of 2,000 additional critical strike. So that ends up being pretty strong overall, a little bit less than 9% additional crit chance. It lasts for 6 seconds, so you do need to kind of be aware of how long you're on your back bar for. You can basically be on your back bar for 4 abilities, and then you have to swap to your front bar to maintain the stacks from Berserking Warrior. So just keep that in mind if you decide to run this set here. You will need to transmute the jewelry though, so you will need to have access to the jewelry crafting skill tree in order to use this set. If you can't transmute jewelry to Bloodthirsty or Infused, then you can't run Berserking Warrior. Alright, moving on to our character sheet here. I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the strongest races in the game right now for stamina DPS. They get 1875 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. Orcs are another very strong choice. They're a little bit stronger than Dark Elves. They get 2000 max stamina, 258 weapon damage, and they get, I believe, 1000 additional max health. So it helps offset that health there. If you're playing as an Orc, then you can use all of your enchants, armor enchants, as max stamina rather than having that one max health enchant, but it just helps you out a little bit there when it comes to flexibility. There are 3 other races you can consider. You have the Sustain races, which I like to call them Sustain races at least. You have Red Guards and the Bosmer, also known as the Wood Elves. So both of these races get 2000 max stamina. Red Guards get, I believe, 950 max stamina return whenever they deal direct damage on, I believe it's a 6-second interval, might be a 5-second interval, so really nice for sustain that way. Wood Elves get 258 stamina regen, so they get passive regen compared to Red Guard's active regen. Both are really, really strong in the sustain department, but they do lose out on the weapon damage, so they don't get the additional weapon damage that Orcs and Dark Elves get. Then finally, we have the Khajiits, which are really good for a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none sort of race. They get 825 magicka health and stamina, they get 85 magicka regen, stamina regen, 100 health regen, and they also get 10% critical healing done and 10% additional critical damage done. So very nice balanced traits across all the 3 different roles. So if you want to use this character as your main character, Khajiits are a pretty decent option because they are a very nice hybrid race there. And then if you have access to the Imperial Edition, you can also go with Imperials. They get 2000 max health, 2000 max stamina, and 233 health, stamina, and magicka back on direct damage hits, I believe, every 5 seconds. So a little bit of additional sustain, really nice health, really nice stamina, helps your survivability, helps you max resources, but very similarly to Red Guards and Bosmer, they don't get any sort of additional weapon damage bonus or any sort of damage passive, so a little bit weaker there, a little bit weaker in sustain department as well compared to Red Guards and Bosmer. In terms of attributes, 64 points into stamina. If you want to shift a few points into health, you can certainly do so. You will be giving up a little bit of DPS in return for survivability this way. Again, we are running regen food, so we do have a little bit less health here, but once we start hitting the raid dummy, we'll see how much health we get with minor toughness. And with minor toughness and Ebon, you'll be sitting at around 18.5k max health, which is perfectly fine for vet trials. We're going with the Shadow Mundus here, very, very powerful still in Elsweyr. We are a vampire for the 10% additional stamina regen. The stage 3 also gives us the Undead passive, which gives us some additional mitigation once we hit 50% health or lower. Then we are using our Tam Takeaway Broth. So this is the regen food here. It did see a nerf in Elsweyr, but it is still pretty strong to use on a Dark Elf, I should say on a Stamina Dragonknight. We're still not really able to sustain by stat food, so for that reason we're sticking with our Tam Takeaway Broth here. You can also use Dubious Camoran Throne instead, if you'd like, instead of our Tam Takeaway Broth, because that food is fairly expensive. Now for our abilities. On our front bar here we have Rending Slashes, Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, Molten Whip, and then Rearming Trap. You can also replace Rearming Trap here with Whirling Blades if you'd like. Will give a little bit of sustain because it is more expensive to use a Noxious Breath, but it does deal more damage to Noxious Breath as well. Then for our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Flames of Oblivion, Rearming Trap, and Standard of Might. Now going over our champion points, CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points across each of our different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, 100 moon cap, 75 in tenacity, which gives us 95 remaining points. I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. You can play around a little bit with your CP distributions. You can put 100 points in tenacity, for example, to maximize your resource return on heavy attacks. You can drop 25 points out of moon cap, bring it down to 75 if you feel like your sustain is okay, and that'll give you 25 more points to play around with. So again, you have a little bit of flexibility here with green CPs. For blue CPs, this is assuming that you have all of your possible debuffs active. So that's Torgue's Infused Crusher, Alkosh, Minor Fracture, and Major Fracture. If you don't have access to all these debuffs, or you anticipate not having very good uptime on your debuffs, or I'm running double sharpened here. If you're running Nirn, main hand, sharpened offhand, you will need to shift a few points into piercing. So for this particular setup here, I have 64 Mighty, 37 Piercing, 61 Precise Strikes, 56 Thaumaturge, and 52 into Master at Arms. Now if you need to shift a few points into piercing, you can drop Mighty down to either 56 or 49, drop Precise Strikes down to either 56 or 52, drop Thaumaturge down to 52, and drop Master at Arms down to 48, and that'll give you a few points back to put into piercing that way. Finally, our red CPs, 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. This is a very generalist approach, so it will not necessarily maximize your mitigation in any single piece of content, but it will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content. So if you want to maximize mitigation, or say for example for VMAL, you will need to shift a few points around accordingly. Alright, so that is pretty much it for all of the build information. So now let's go ahead and talk about the actual rotation itself on a 6 million dummy. Then we will do a 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get a point of comparison to other classes. Like I mentioned earlier, Stam Decays have a static rotation. Our main spam build is going to be Noxious Breath, and then we're going to swap over to Whirling Blades at around 35% health or so. But otherwise, your rotation pretty much remains exactly the same here. So always want to open up with Rearming Trap and try to rebuff with Flames of Oblivion as well. So Flames, Rearming Trap, do your backbar dots. Then you're just going to be using your Noxious Breath as your spamble here. Use a potion here just so I can... So here you can see here that we're going back to our back bar in order to reapply Rearming Trap and Flames of Oblivion. Then we go back to our backbar dots. And then on our second run through, we apply all of our dots on the back bar here. And then we rinse and repeat that way. So basically what it boils down to is you're going to do break your front bar rotation first to re-up Flames of Oblivion and Rearming Trap. And then you will, on the second go around on your back bar, you will just do all of your back bar dots that way. So again, fairly static rotation, and it'll make more sense when we actually see it in action on the 21 million dummy parse there. Now, in terms of ultimate, Standard of Might has this really long sort of cast animation, so you're going to want to try to cast this last, the exception being for Poison Injection. You still want to cast Poison Injection at the very end of your back bar rotation, so it would be something like Endless Hail, Caltrops, Standard of Might, Poison Injection, and then you can go back to your front bar rotation that way. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you will want to be running Whirling Blades at around 35% health or so. That's just to help out your sustain. Technically speaking, Whirling Blades is better than Noxious Breath at starting at around 46% health, but because it does cost more stamina compared to using Noxious Breath, we're not going to be using it that early. We're going to be saving it for around 35-30% health instead, just in order to help sustain our stamina for that move to Whirling Blades. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with the parse. So the 21 million raid dummy that you see here will give us pretty much all of the raid buffs in the game, with the exception of a few different ones. So it basically helps to standardize your buffs across different classes. So this basically allows us to compare different classes to each other. The only class that cannot be compared using this method is going to be Stamina Necromancer, because they do have major vulnerability through their Colossus buff. So with that regard, you will need to shift I should say, adjust the Stamina Necromancer parse down a little bit in order to account for that major vulnerability uptime. But for the rest of the classes, you can take this parse and compare it to the other parses that I do. So you can't necessarily take this parse and compare it to Lyco's because we are two different calibers of DPS, but you can compare this to the other Stamina DPS builds that I have on my channel. Now let's go ahead and get started here with our parse. Make sure to activate sanities on the front bar because we do have Lokkestiiz on the front bar here. So again, we will be breaking our front bar rotation here to recache Rearming Trap and Flames of Oblivion. Go back for our front bar here before we need to reapply all of our back bar dots. Reapply all of them, and then go back to running your spammable. And then on this back bar rotation, we're re-upping all of the things on our back bar. And we repeat the entire rotation again. So then here, we do not re-up Trap or Flames of Oblivion. Instead, we break our front bar rotation. And then we rinse, lather, and repeat. And then we do standard poison injection to our front bar rotation. A little bit late re-upping Rearming Trap and Flames of Oblivion there, but not that big of a deal. And remember, if you're running Lokkestiiz front bar, do not activate synergies while on your back bar because you will miss out on that major slayer. So at this point moving forward, Whirling Blades, again, will do more damage than Noxious Breath. But because it also costs more stamina to use, we're actually going to be holding off and using Whirling Blades until we hit basically more or less around 35 to 30% max health. After we finish off this back bar rotation, instead of using Noxious Breath, oh, missed poison injection, not a big deal. We're doing Whirling Blades instead. So you still want to do Noxious Breath for that dot that it puts down, but you will not be using it as your spammable from this point onward. Instead, you'll be using Whirling Blades instead. From there, it's pretty much smooth sailing until you basically kill the boss. Oh, we might end up running low on stamina here at the end. Yep, gonna need to do a heavy attack here. So there we have it. So that is your Stam DK parse. So we did have the heavy attack there at the very end, but the raid dummy is a little bit unrealistic when it comes to actual in-raid fight duration. So this lasted about 4 minutes 13 seconds. Actual raid fights are not going to be nearly as long. It might be closer to about 2.5 to 3 minutes, so you wouldn't normally need to have you attack in an actual raid environment, because again, the fights don't last as long as the parse here. So we pulled 82.9k. Again, a much needed buff to stam decays compared to where they used to be prior to Elsweyr. Still not the top stamina DPS, but still very competitive now due to a couple of changes that were made to the stam decays arsenal. Our Major Slayer, just with one synergy, you're able to maintain about 60 to 65% uptime on Major Slayer. Just keep in mind you do need to make sure to activate it on the front bar rather than on your back bar if you are front barring it. If you have it on the body, then it doesn't really matter where you decide to activate any sort of synergies. You should be able to get 100% Major Slayer uptime with perfected Lokkestiiz if you have 2 or more synergies and you're able to stagger them appropriately. Just keep that in mind if you are running Lokkestiiz, to make sure to kind of stagger your synergies out a little bit so that way you can get as high Major Slayer uptime as you possibly can. Noxious Breath, as they're spammable here, does a lot of damage on that initial hit there. You can see max hit was around 35.7k. And then Whirling Blades didn't use quite as many, but a lot stronger after a certain point compared to Noxious Breath here. And again, we're using at around 35 to 30% max health because it is more expensive to use, and so we're gonna basically let the dummy keep on going down and down until we're at a point where we think we can sustain the Whirling Blade. You can even drop this sort of threshold down a little bit more if you want to continue to sustain a little bit better using Noxious Breath. So you can drop it down to about 25% rather than 30 to 35%. So that is going to be it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.